The Huna Code in Religions by Max Freedom Long. And this is a continuation of Chapter 2. In Egypt, as the picture writing was slowly adapted to use as an alphabet in which sounds were indicated by certain pictures which had been simplified, changes gradually took place in the religious beliefs, and these were reflected in the inscriptions on tombs and monuments, as well as in the continually recopied Book of the Dead, which was placed with the mummy to guide the spirit through the hereafter. As a result of these changes, it has been difficult to learn just what words stood for their counterparts of the 10 elements in Huna, which had just been listed. Sir Wallace Budge, Budge, one of the authorities on the subject, does not agree with the learned scholar Max Muller, or with the findings of the great English investigator and student Gerald Massey. All offer slightly different interpretations of words and symbolic pictures. Budge, in giving his list, warns that there have been changes which have made exact meanings difficult to decide upon, but we will use the list as he presents it, and later note what Muller and Massey had to say. The first element in the Huna system, as well as the Egyptian, is the physical body. These are the Kino, K-I-N-O, and Khat, respectively, K-H-A-T. Both words begin with a K sound, but beyond that there is little resemblance, despite the fact that Massey was able to assemble pages of words from the language of the Polynesians and the Egyptians, which had similar sounds and meanings. The three spirits, or selves, or souls of Huna, check well with the Egyptian. The low self of the kahunas lived in the intestines, as has been noted, or we can say as did the Egyptians in the heart. However, there is no resemblance between the Egyptian word ab, A-B, for heart, and the word unihipoli in Hawaiian, meaning the animal self which presides over the life in the body. The word for the heart in Hawaiian is puwai, P-U-U-W-A-I. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing this, which has no meaning of a self, but symbolizes the low self as the part of pu filled with the water wai. Water is the symbol of mana, or vital force, and the low self manufactures the mana and shares it with the two other selves as the veritable water of life mentioned in the Book of the Dead. For a further comparison of the two elements, we find a most interesting thing in the Egyptian. The lesser, or heart soul, came back at times to visit the mummified body in the tomb, and in doing so, it assumed the form of a snake, a bee, or a grasshopper. The word unihipoli has a secondary meaning of grasshopper and a primary meaning of the remains of the deceased person, especially his preserved bones. The roots of the word give the meaning of the low self and also a fine description of its characteristics. The snake was the emblem of vital force, and in India, as pictured as a serpent of force sleeping at the base of the spine, which, with proper manipulation, could be caused to rise and vitalize the entire man with its serpent fire, the kundalini in yoga. In Egypt, the bee could bring temporary life back to the mummy because it carried honey, which was the nectar of the gods, and the sa, S-A, of the Egyptians, the divine ichor, which flowed in the veins of the gods and which could be used to give life to men in the body. The grasshopper also had a magic fluid in its mouth. The Hawaiian gods, when needing an extra supply of mana, were said to descend to earth and take it from green things, as the grasshopper takes its magic fluid. And then it says in brackets, the Sahu, S-A-H-U, which we will come to shortly, has a soul raised to the God level, and in its glorified light body had Sa, S-A, the magical force of the high mana power of the Huna system, close bracket. When we come to the next element for comparison, we find in the Egyptian the Ka, K-A. This is so much like the Hawaiian Aka, or shadow, that one may guess that the A had been lost from the Ka, and with it part of its significance. We know that the Egyptian glyphs, when used later for sounds or symbols in words, often gave the consonant sounds, but left the reader to supply the vowels. At this late date, we have no knowledge of the spoken language and used on the Nile, so we must guess at what vowel sounds should go with the consonants. It is quite in keeping with the problem of the Ka sound to decide that it was really called Aka, and that not a soul at all, but a general term for the shadowy body of the heart self, or the low self. This is made more conclusive by the knowledge that we have of the nature of the Egyptian concept of Ka. Budge says that it was, quote, the double attached to the physical body, but had an individual life and could come and go from the body, close quote. Then in brackets it says, this is correct when we know the Huna belief that each of the three selves lives in its own shadowy body, or kino aka, after death, and that the selves can come and go as they please, often being seen by people with psychic abilities as ghosts. The aka has no life of its own and is never separated from the self, close bracket. It has the outline and characteristics of the body and was an abstract individuality or personality possessed of absolutely independent existence. Open bracket. The ghostly low self, usually accompanied by the middle self, is in the form of duplication of the dead physical body and can materialize enough to be seen or even touched, as modern psychical research has discovered, close bracket. The Ka, if not offered food and drink in the tomb, might starve. This was a mistake made by the too literal Egyptians in the early ages when they mummified the body in the belief that the resurrection was of the actual flesh and bone of the body. The Huna truth, which must have been known even then to the initiates, was that the spirits drew the small amount of mana needed after death from living relatives, and that it was the Aka, or shadowy body, which survived and so could be said to be resurrected and used by the souls, or selves, or the man. The word given in the Egyptian list for shadow is, I don't know how to pronounce this word, Kaibit, K-H-A-I-B-I-T. Okay, so that's the word given in the Egyptian list for shadow. And Budge writes that it was another part of the man which was mentioned frequently in connection with his soul, and in later ages was thought to be with or near it. As has been said, this element was pictured in the writings as a small parasol, or sunshade, which casts a shadow. It is seen in pictures from the tombs in which the happy life in heaven is being enjoyed by the man and his wife after their arrival there as purified souls. The man usually has a slightly pointed parasol resembling a fan in size, while the wife has one that's has a more rounded top, but the symbol is unmistakable, and the shadow as a body for the souls has been taken along, as these are the Sahu, S-A-H-U, souls, and as a man and as man and wife are pictured, we may guess that we have a muddled outer meaning in which two middle selves have been united to make a single high self. In the Huna system, the middle self was called the Uhani, or a self unique in that it alone could talk. In the Egyptian lore, much was made of the ability of the man to talk, and there were ritual prayers made at the time of birth of a child asking that it be allowed to speak. In the afterlife, prayers were included in the Book of the Dead to ensure the ability of the deceased to speak, and a special ritual was performed to bring about the opening of the mouth. Otherwise, the words Uhane and Ba in the two systems bear little resemblance in themselves. In fact, the reversal of the heart self name, Ab, A-B, gives us the Ba, B-A, and remembering the lack of vowels in the picture writing, one is justified in suspecting that the two selves are the same. If this is true, the Egyptian list of element is made shorter. We turn to the next word for the soul, the Kua, K-H-U. Budge writes, quote, the spiritual intelligence of man was called Kua. Muller thinks it may have been Iku, I-K-U, and it seems to have taken form as a shining, luminous, intangible shape of the body. The Kua, like the Ka, could be imprisoned in the tomb, and to obviate this catastrophe, special formulae were composed and duly recited, end quote. The above description, which Budge has drawn from the various parts of the Egyptian writings, contains items belonging to each of the three selves of the man, as specified by Huna. The spiritual intelligence and the shining, luminous elements fit the high self, whose intelligence is a level higher than that of the middle self, and whose presence is never noted as a form, but only as a white light that comes to illuminate one's surroundings for a few moments. The high self symbol is light and the sun. The intangible shape of the body applies to the low self, but the shadowy, the Aka bodies, are always intangible for all three selves, except when the low self is in some way given a temporary filling of material or substance is materialized, as they say, when spirits come in solid flesh to visit the living at seances. None of the three selves can be confined as ghosts outside the body. That is evidently a superstitious belief which developed in Egypt, along with many other such beliefs. However, this idea of confining the spirit low self may have had its origin in the practice of a degraded sect of kahunas who carried on temple worship and who used hypnotic suggestion to cause the low self spirits of sacrificed victims to remain by the temple and in some way to guard it. The supposed curse placed on certain tombs and thought by some to have exerted killing influence on the explorers of those tombs after thousands of years may also have been linked to the traditional placing of spirit guards to protect the remains of the one buried in the tomb. The most famous and most dreaded form of the death prayer used in Hawaii right up to modern times was based on the ability of a kahuna of the Anana, A-N-A-A-N-A class, who possessed inherited low self-spirits as slaves to control them hypnotically and to send them out to take vital force or mana from a living victim for 3 days so that he weakened and died. Dr. Brigham fought off with counter-hypnosis such an attack on one of the native helpers who had accompanied him on a botanical collecting trip into the backcountry. The kahuna was killed when Dr. Brigham commanded the spirits to return to him and take his vital force instead of that of the selected victim. Oh, I get it. Okay, let me read that last sentence again. I don't know if this makes any sense to you. So, the kahuna was killed when Dr. Brigham commanded the spirits to return to him and take his vital force instead of that of the selected victim. So I think what Max Freedom Long is saying here is that Dr. Brigham commanded the spirits to return to the kahuna who had sent out the spirits and to take that kahuna's vital force. Okay. Yes. The third spirit of man in the Huna system, the high self, or the Amakua, compares well with the Egyptian Sahu, S-A-H-U, which Budge does not list, but which Massey finds very important. Alvin Boyd Kuhn, Kuhn, in his book The Lost Light, drew heavily on the studies made earlier by Massey. Kuhn wrote, page 251, that the highest spirits in the Egyptian heavens were as gods and associated freely with them. These were the perfected mortals, and such descriptions of them as we have indicates that they had risen through the various places of testing and purification and had managed to reach the highest heavenly level or state as purified single souls. The last part of the man in the ancient Egyptian list was his name, Ren, R-E-N. Although it was counted as part of the man in Egypt, it was not in Huna. On the other hand, in Huna, the ability to remember one's name or anything at all depended upon remembering the remembering faculty, and this belonged to the low self. It did all the remembering for the middle self, and so could not be allowed to get lost from it at death. Otherwise, the middle self would not know who it was. The high self had a different and superior thinking power and did not need the low self to do its remembering. What it wanted to know, it knew perfectly and immediately by what might be called a process of identifying itself with a thing, person, or event and learning all about it. The event could be of the past and to a limited extent of the future, the latter feature accounting for prophecy as something made possible for a man who could gain the aid of the high self. The Egyptians believed that if one knew the name of God, a favor could be asked in his name, and it could not be refused. Just calling the name of a person appears to have given one a certain power to demand favors of him. To curse him, it was necessary to know his name. The high self, after graduation from the level of the middle self, was given a new name, and there seems to have been a lost lore connected with the learning of this name and calling upon the owner of the name when requesting help in healing or other affairs of life. Budge sums up the listing of the parts of man as follows. And it says here in brackets, page 192 of the book already mentioned. Close bracket. Quote, "We have seen that the entity of a man consisted of a body, double, heart, soul, spiritual intelligence, or spirit, power, shadow, and name. These 8 parts may be reduced to 3 by leaving out of consideration the double, heart, power, shadow, and name, as representing beliefs which were produced by the Egyptians as he slowly ascended the scale of civilization, and as being the peculiar product of his race. We may say that a man consisted of a body, soul, and spirit. But did all three rise and live in the world beyond the grave? The Egyptian texts answer this question definitely. The soul and the spirit of the righteous passed from the body and lived with the beatified and the gods in heaven. But the physical body did not rise again, and it was believed never to leave the tomb. There were ignorant people in Egypt who no doubt believed in the resurrection of the corruptible body, and who imagined that the new life would be, after all, something very much like a continuation of that which they were living in this world. In the 5th dynasty, about BC 3400, it was stated definitely, quote, "The soul to the heaven, the body to earth." End quote. Budge goes on to say that the belief that mummification was necessary to preserve the soul by preserving the body passed and was replaced by a belief that by recitation of magic formulae, the dead could cause a heavenly reconstruction of the earthly body and put it to use. The Book of the Dead was an elaboration of such formulae, and a copy was buried with the deceased so that he would be sure to recite the correct words and produce a new body. In still later times, especially after Christianity took form, the Egyptians became content to rely upon the promise that when the time came for the Last Judgment, all bodies would be resurrected. Huna would have said that in the evolutionary progress of a man, his Egyptian AB, or low self, would rise to become the KHU, or middle self, and then the Sahu, SAHU, or high self. But if the Egyptians had lost the secret knowledge that their high self was composed of a male and female, then Kuhn's conclusion that the Sahu represented a single soul would be incorrect. Gerald Massey said that the Sahu was the soul, and that after full purification, and when in its highest state, it went to live forever in heaven as one of the Assyrian gods, as well as one with the various gods of the totem type, among whom was the sun, Ra, R-A, as the supreme god of the older days, who had become identified with Osiris, and later being triune in nature and composed of his wife Isis and his son Horus and himself. Muller adds to the list of man's parts the Iku, or Iku, I-K-U, which he calls the illuminated soul. The Egyptian word Sekhem, S-E-K-H-E-M, is given by Budge as meaning mastery over something or power. He lists it as an important part of the man's entity which went into heaven with him. He explains, the Sekhem of man was apparently his vital force or strength personified, and the Egyptians believed that it could and did, under certain conditions, follow him that possessed it upon earth into heaven. Okay, so the Egyptians believed that it could and it did, under certain conditions, follow him that possessed it upon earth into heaven. Huna tells us that this personification of the mana power is a mistake which was simple to make, for the 3 grades of mana are as much a part of the man as the 3 selves, and their three shadowy bodies. Mana is the vital force, and without it there can be no entity. In Egypt, in this connection, we read in the moral axioms of Ani, A-N-I, quote, pour libations of water for thy father and mother who rest in the valley. Thy son shall do the same for thee. End quote. The Huna symbol for mana, or vital force, was water, and the libation poured with actual water symbolizes to the initiates the sharing of mana by the living with the ancestors, they always needing a small amount of life force to keep them alive as spirits. And I'm going to pause here. There's a small part of chapter 2 left to read, but I think that's enough to digest for now. Chapter 3 is going to be called Huna in Ancient India. So I'm looking forward to that. And I hope you're enjoying this. Till soon.